Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be splitting my time with the honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson-Caribou. Mr. Speaker, I'm so honoured to speak to this motion today on behalf of my friend and colleague from Edmonton-Wetaskiwin. I remember so clearly, Mr. Speaker, when I was elected as a trustee to the Waterloo County Board of Education in 1978. I remember when the superintendent mentioned the word autism, and I have to be honest, I didn't even know what the word autism meant. I remember, though, how our officials grappled to address the needs of the children and their families who were suffering with autism. Since that time, it's obvious that we've come a long way in addressing this issue, but we still have a very long way to go. The impacts of autism are wide-ranging for individuals and families affected by the condition. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, can present lifelong challenges. For researchers, ASD is particularly complex as it affects each individual differently. A great deal of valuable research has already been done to uncover the causes of ASD, as well as research into the most effective treatments and long-term implications of this disorder. However, further research is required in order to gain a more solid understanding of this very complex situation. That is why today's motion is so important. Let me read just the appeal that's in the motion, Mr. Speaker. The House calls on the government to grant $19 million over 5 years as requested by the Canadian Autism Partnership Working Group, Self-Advocates Advisory Group, and the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorders Alliance in order to establish a Canadian Autism Partnership that would support families and address key issues such as information sharing and research, early detection, diagnosis, and treatment. Over the past few weeks, I've been contacted a number of times by a constituent in my riding with autism. Allow me to share a few of his words with this House. Quote, "I am autistic on an extreme of the spectrum called Asperger's syndrome. I have been incredibly blessed by the fact that I am high-functioning Asperger's and have a great support group of family and friends, so I do not face the same challenges that most with autism and Asperger's syndrome face. While I face few of the challenges that many with autism and Asperger's syndrome do, I do have some idea of the challenges, and therefore this is a big issue for me. I have been aware for a few weeks after the statements in the House of Commons by the Member of Parliament for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin that in the last budget, the Liberal government has not supplied funding to the Canadian Autism Partnership. This bothers me tremendously. I don't like to see any loss of funding to groups that work on autism planning, strategies, and awareness. I have taken a lot of time to decide whether or not to say anything about this because it is a very important issue for me, but also a very private one. This is not a question, I suppose, and I don't know what to do to bring this issue to the federal government's attention. So this is just me expressing my frustration with the situation to make you aware of my concerns." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, Economic Action Plan 2015, established by our former Conservative government, proposed to provide $2 million in 2015-16 to create a working group led by the Minister of Health to consult with stakeholders, including the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance, on the development of a Canadian Autism Partnership. Of the $2 million in funding, $1.5 million would be used to support stakeholder participation in the working group. The working group would be tasked with the development of a plan for the Canadian Autism Partnership that would address key issues such as information sharing and research, early detection, diagnosis and treatment, and supporting families. This is exactly what my constituent and thousands of Canadians are asking for. In fact, this young man, now a university student, states, quote, "I was diagnosed as Asperger's on the autism spectrum when I was 9 years old. One of the biggest challenges I face is that my reading comprehension is very weak. I read a level behind my year in grades 1 and 2, and because of this, now that I am in university, this presents a major challenge because of all the reading required for my classes. My short-term memory is not very strong, but my long-term memory is very strong. As a combination of all of the above, schoolwork takes me twice as long as a normal person to complete. This means during school I do not sleep much at all. Some corrections can be made by using text-to-voice software to dictate all of my work, as well as using software to read my work back to me. This is very helpful when it comes to editing essays, and the software can also be used to read my readings to me. which reduces my work time somewhat. But challenges still exist in taking notes as well as studying. There is really no way to correct the note-taking problems, but studying can be addressed by studying orally in a group. Many of the ways I can use to overcome or correct my challenges came from professionals, and I would really hate for others younger than me not to have access to such services because of budgetary reasons." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Autism Partnership is designed to rapidly drive policy improvements at all levels of government for Canadian families living with autism. Whatever the challenge related to autism, for example, early intervention, education, housing, vocation, the CAP will bring the top experts in the country together to provide solid, evidence-based advice to decision makers. As important as what the CAP is what it is not. It is not just another autism organization. Rather, it's a true partnership intended to represent the entire Canadian autism community, speaking together with one voice on the many things on which the Canadian autism community largely agrees. Taken directly from the Canadian Autism Partnership Project's report, Better Together, the Case for a Canadian Autism Partnership, quote, "With input received from 4,963 Canadians representing all 10 provinces and 3 territories, it is clear that there is a strong positive support for the CAP model as presented in this business plan. In particular, stakeholders valued the opportunities that CAP would provide for collaboration and knowledge exchange. They saw the potential for achieving efficiencies in programming and service delivery and the benefits of a knowledge repository. Families and self-advocates were enthusiastic about the potential for being able to influence the research agenda and recognized that the proposed CAP may not necessarily address their immediate issues. Its focus on addressing complex issues and systemic barriers were an essential part of moving towards improved outcomes for families and individuals and enhancing capacity in communities. The development of the Canadian Autism Partnership provides a unique opportunity to harness the collective investment, innovation, knowledge, and capacity of a nation to get behind one of the most pressing issues of our time by enabling governments, researchers, and service leaders to work together to address these barriers that prevent Canadians with autism from participating in the full experience of our Canadian society." End quote. Individuals with autism and their families want what everyone else wants: to fulfill their aspirations and flourish with the support of their family, friends, and society as a whole. All too often, however, they and their families face a strong stigma and lack of understanding in the challenges they face and the support they need in order to reach their full potential. Families can feel that they're on their own. They might not know which way to turn or where to seek the best advice. However, through their personal advocacy efforts, individuals affected by autism and their families have shown us how resilient they are. People affected by this condition can and do succeed with the right support, as evidenced by the young man from my riding whom I quoted earlier. It's important that these individuals and their families know that the federal government is working with its partners and other stakeholders to support the autism community by enhancing the evidence base and increasing awareness. Mr. Speaker, this is why the Liberal government must approve this funding. I'll finish with this. Many times over the past 11 years, I've served here in Parliament, and again today, my friend and colleague from Edmonton-Wetaskiwin has shared his very personal journey with this House. He has demonstrated how a family deals effectively with the enormous challenges faced by those dealing with autism. It's been a real honor for me and my colleagues on this side of the House especially, but for all members to have met Jayden, to see the fantastic enjoyment that he gets from life, and to experience the joy that he gives to us as members. I'm amazed at the perseverance and tenacity that is needed by every family and community that deals with autism on a daily basis. It's clear that we need to do all that we can to raise their awareness and work toward effective support solutions. I hope that on this important, non-partisan issue, that all members will support this motion by my colleague from Edmonton-Wetaskiwin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Toronto-Danforth.
I would like to thank the member opposite for that speech and everything that he has said. My question for him is whether when looking at the specific needs that we're all raising and talking about today, we've been talking about autism spectrum disorder, but there are commonalities for other families as well, dealing with other severe disabilities. Whether he sees options and what he would see as those options for how we can serve all families, making sure we're not creating gaps between people who might have one named illness and maybe a very rare genetic disorder that isn't being spoken about today. What does he see as potential openings and a framework to deal with those situations?
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for this question. But this question gets to the heart of the challenges that are faced by every MP every day. So to stand behind or hide behind the argument that there may be some gaps or we can't meet everyone's need on all of the range of issues that we're faced with as parliamentarians, I think is an easy way out. It's an easy way out of actually dealing with a problem that we've all recognized in this House for decades, and we know that we need to do something. And so I would urge my colleagues, please, Mr. Speaker, through you, please do not hide behind the facade of saying, well, we can't help everybody, so we're not going to help anybody. All of you have heard that story of the young guy who's on the beach and the starfish have been washed up on the shore and they're stranded there, and he walks along throwing the starfish back into the ocean, and somebody comes along and saying, what you're doing is useless. You're not making any difference. And he picked up another one and he said, well, I made a difference for that one. And I know that story's been told hundreds of times, but it illustrates to me what I think the heart of this issue is and the response that is applicable to the member opposite. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Essex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his speech, and I think it's clear that on this side of the House there's wide support to support families who have persons living with autism. What's desperately needed, though, is leadership from the government, not excuses about things that may or may not be there. It is leadership that's needed, and the provinces desperately need this as well. They need some direction. They need to know that the federal government cares about persons living with autism throughout their entire life, recognizes the support that's necessary, and will put the money into the Canadian Autism Partnership. The money that we're talking about is such a small amount of money to be given that will make such a huge difference in the way we go forward in talking about persons with autism in our country. Every person in this House knows someone in their family, in their community, certainly in their constituency, who has a person living with autism and who needs the federal government to show the leadership that's necessary. So I ask the member, through you, Mr. Speaker, if he agrees that the $19 million is a small amount of money to help all of those families, and that the leadership should be shown from this government today with a vote in favour.
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for her comments and for her interest in this issue. Mr. Speaker, $19 million over 5 years. We're talking less than $4 million a year. And I think that's a very small amount in relationship to the needs out there, in relationship to the entire budget. And I want to point out that the Conservative government provided leadership on this back in 2015, 2016, when we committed $2 million to get this started. And now we're pulling back from a commitment that the Government of Canada had made to this entire community and their families. And Mr. Speaker, to me it's unconscionable, because as my colleague has pointed out, there isn't one member in this House, I'm convinced, there's not one member in this House that can say they don't have a relative or a former schoolmate or a neighbor, someone that has been impacted. And then not just that one person has been impacted, Mr. Speaker, but the ramifications of the challenges that are faced by the families and communities that are surrounding these individuals. It is incumbent upon us to act, and to act now, and I hope that we can convince at least enough members on the opposite side to support this motion, which is very worthy of support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.